fire there, fire in the sea. Why so look and hold for a tree?
I shared who my parents are and who my grandparents are. And the reason we do that is in case there's someone in the audience who would know my family. And we'd have an instant connection. We'd have that instant sense of belonging. My parents are the current hereditary chief, Bernie A. George, and my mother is Deanna George. My grandparents are the late hereditary chief, John L. George. And in the Union of BC Indian circle, he was also known as the Right Honorable. And my grandmother is the late Lillian or Dolly George, and she gifted me her name many, many years ago. I also said to you, on behalf of my friends and relatives of the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, welcome you here to our homelands and waters. Thank you. There's a lot of new faces here, so I'm going to share just a little bit about myself. I work for the Tsleil-Waututh's Sacred Trust Initiative, which is our official opposition to the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. My title is I'm a project manager for intergovernmental relations. So we focused a lot of our work on reaching out to the other First Nations along the pipeline and municipalities also that are, especially around here, around the Burrard Inlet. It's been a really interesting journey. I think what you take away from this and what we put into it is the need for all of us to come together, because we can only beat this together. Your community, my community, and all the other communities that will be deeply impacted by this project. About a year ago, earlier this month, our nation launched a federal court. We launched a appeal to leave. Sorry, I'm not really good with the legal jargon. To the Federal Court of Appeals. We only had to be accepted if one of our issues were accepted. We only needed one. So we submitted 4. Because, well, hey, the odds are better. The first one was, it's kind of new to now, but we were challenging the NEB for going ahead and scheduling their NEB Aboriginal oral tradition hearings. And they did it without consulting the First Nations along the pipeline. And the time they allotted for this area, the Lower Fraser River part, would be a time when we're all out fishing. So we all, sent letters and blah, blah, blah. They changed it anyway. But the other part is that as you all know as well, it's a flawed process. The NEB and Trans Mountain would be able to ask our elders questions during these hearings, but the First Nation would not be allowed to ask questions back. And that's just wrong. What kind of democracy is that? The second issue was they erred. The federal government erred. Can you believe that? They erred. In not they were trying to give their authority to Kinder Morgan and the NEB to consult with First Nations. The third point was under their own act, Environmental Assessment Act of 2012, the NEB is to consult with jurisdictions. Well, under their own Section 18, Tsleil-Waututh fits in as a jurisdiction. We have our own stewardship policies that we adhere to, and we ensure that any other economic development that happened within our traditional lands and waters adheres to these policies as well. And then the fourth one was just the scope of the project. Not only is it adding a second pipeline, but as you all know, It's doubling the storage tank farm here, and it's also adding a few more docks where the tankers can dock at the Westridge terminal. Well, lo and behold, we were granted leave on all 4 points. It's been really difficult because, much like the NGOs out there that are trying to help communities, they're being audited and scrutinized for the money that they're receiving and that they're spending. The Tsleil-Waututh is no different in any other First Nations that are taking up the fight. We are being audited every single, well, we're always audited, but we're more harshly scrutinized these last few years because they just want to make sure we're spending our own money and not taking money from anybody else. So it's been quite the commitment on behalf of our small community because it's very expensive and it's not right. Canadian citizens should not have to take their governments to court to make them do their job. It's not right.
Mayor Corrigan runs a tight ship.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the winner of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Green Champion Award, Mayor Derek Corrigan.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And I wanted to acknowledge someone else tonight who is here, a special acknowledgement, because she's a member of GROAT. She is a long-time activist and citizen in our city, but she was just named Citizen of the Year for the city of Burnaby. I want to recognize Elsie Dean. There you go. Is people like that help make GROAT a very effective organization. Now I've got, you see what we're up against, and I want to first of all thank Deepak Patani. Deepak is the deputy of the engineering department, and he's in charge of environmental services. And Deepak was saddled with this issue of Kinder Morgan, which has dominated his life. And I get emails from Deepak Patani on the weekends during the middle of the night. Deepak has been waking up in order to do one more thing, to think of one more thing that he can do to make our case before the National Energy Board. And I really want to compliment one of our most dedicated public servants. Thank you, Deepak. Serving you. And also we are lucky to have Chris Bocock. Chris Bocock is the deputy chief of our fire department, but we were very lucky that his earlier experience was in the tar sands in Alberta, where he became an expert on firefighting. Wow. And so Chris brings with him not only the training that he receives as a Burnaby firefighter, but also the experience that he received during the time that he was working in the tar sands. So he is an expert, and we were blessed to have him here to face this issue with us. We were just lucky again in the city of Burnaby. Thank you, Chris, for the tremendous work. I've been here before, and I've talked to you many times, and most of you know what we're up against. But I've got some good news for you, and I wanted to just talk a little bit about that first. is that there are more and more people opposing this project and the fundamentally flawed process in the National Energy Board. We're seeing that more and more people are recognizing that this is their fight too. It's not just the city of Burnaby. So this past Friday at Metro Vancouver, and most of you know Metro Vancouver is the regional government that brings together all of the municipalities from across the Lower Mainland. The regional government decided to oppose the Kinder Morgan project. Cities across the Lower Mainland, there were only 2 representatives who voted against the motion to oppose. One was Ralph Drew, the mayor of Belcarra, and the other was a councillor from the township of Langley. So across the whole of the Lower Mainland, my colleagues are standing with us, and they're standing up for us, and I'm very proud of the fact that they're we had a declaration signed that said we had entirely lost faith in the National Energy Board process, and the mayors of Vancouver, of course Burnaby, New Westminster, the city of North Vancouver, Victoria, Squamish, Bowen Island, and Port Moody expressed their deep, deep, deep opposition to the process that has been going on at the National Energy Board, and they demanded that this be reviewed by government and that they go back to the beginning and start over because this process has just not been fair. Now, moreover, this process has been recognized by motions at the Union of BC Municipalities who supported us and have complained that the process is not fair and the National Energy Board review process does not produce a fair result. It was followed by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities having opposed the process being implemented by the National Energy Board. So not only of local mayors and our regional government, but our provincial organization and our federal organization of municipalities that stood with the city of Burnaby. And I can tell you that's a lot of work behind the scenes to make that happen. But we are standing in solidarity with our colleagues across Canada in opposing the process that's been instituted in this National Energy Board hearing, and I feel confident that that is going to be recognized during this election, that the cities do not trust the National Energy Board to make a just decision. Now, we've had pipelines across our country before, but we've never seen a process like this, one in which there is dirty oil, this bitumen oil being moved across our country. And this bitumen oil is more dangerous than any oil we've had previously. And more people are talking about the Kinder Morgan project and finding that this project is unsatisfactory on so many different levels. And in fact, I was very pleased the other day in having a telephone conversation with the new Premier of Alberta, Rachel Notley, and immediately followed it by sending her the report on the tank farm and the report that we had. And so I'm working on Rachel already, and just to make sure that she knows me well enough, as I sent my assistant to work with her for the first couple of weeks so that we would be well introduced. Every day, more and more people are standing with us, and I am so proud that we continue to know that people are rising up to oppose what is truly a wrong course of action and one that doesn't recognize what we need to do in order to be able to ensure that our city remains beautiful. And here's just a couple of pictures of what we're working for and what we're trying to preserve in our city. Take a look at these photos. Now, is that worth giving up in order to export oil to China?
Nope.
As you know, yesterday there was a spill in California. 9 miles of shoreline coated by what's currently being estimated as 2,500 barrels of oil. up from the 500 barrels they were estimating earlier. An Aframax tanker carries about 550,000 barrels, and Kinder Morgan is proposing to have as many as 34 of those traveling along our coastline and through our inlet. It's shameful what they're doing, and it is an act that threatens future generations. And I know, having Carleen Thomas here and talking about her grandchildren, had to strike all of you who have grandchildren and know that what we're here for is not just fighting for ourselves, but fighting for the future of our children and our grandchildren. And that's why we're so determined not to let this happen.
Right.
Now, we've been working with the Tsleil-Waututh and working with the City of Vancouver, and while we're here tonight focused on the tank farm, I wanted to show you a little bit of the work that we're doing on another report, which is the potential spill and the response that would occur to any spill in Burrard Inlet. And Vancouver, Burnaby, and the Tsleil-Waututh have invested significant resources to produce information that will show visually to people exactly what would happen. The first of these has been one at the first Narrows, and the Tsleil-Waututh have also prepared one at the second Narrows, and we continue to do visual representations. So if we could look at the visual representation there of what would happen in an oil spill. Can we get the light? The hours are right beside it. That's at 6 hours, the estimated response time for them to arrive at the scene. As each of those hours passes, you can see how the oil is distributed by the tides. There goes Stanley Park. And we know from past experience, if it can happen, it will happen. Maybe not in our generation, it may be a gift that's given to our children or our grandchildren if we aren't successful in doing what we can to stop this project from being advanced. Now, I want to just close off by telling you a little bit about what's happening out in the rest of the world. Having seen these very visual examples of what can occur, one of the interesting things that we see is that the Kinder Morgan is absolutely confident that they in fact are able to proceed with this. As Kinder Morgan continues to sell their proposal, telling us that everything will be fine, assuring us that they're listening to us, putting their employees on television to say how safe things are, when in fact they're refusing to listen to us, and the National Energy Board is not demanding that citizens be heard. This is so disappointing, I think, to all of us to know that is happening. In fact, Richard Kinder is so confident that he was featured in a Houston Business Journal saying, "We'll get this thing built and in service in 2018. We've done our best, I think, to reach out to the communities affected, but it's impossible to get some people to listen." I think he's talking about you. I know he's talking about me. And Kinder Morgan seems to believe that the pipeline, tank farm, and terminal expansion approvals are already a done deal. In fact, they're already asking for input on construction. They're sending out notes. Any of you get these notes yet in your mail? Yeah, you've already got them. It's that they're so confident they're asking to comment on construction before they've even got the approval. And in fact, they're asking for your input to see whether or not you, in fact, will do so. Well, I can tell you, I don't know how many of you saw the news, but Robin Allen, the former CEO of ICBC, she's an economist who has been on our side throughout this matter and has been writing just absolutely fantastic papers that have really skewered the economics of this decision. And Robin Allen has finally withdrawn as an intervener yesterday, and she said, I give up. The process is rigged, it's hopeless, and I'm not going to keep working and producing information when they're just not listening and they don't intend to listen. So Robin Allen has quit the process, as did Mark Eliason earlier quit the process. And what we're finding is people are giving up. I respect Robin Allen and the work she's done, and I respect her decision, because Robin Allen was working on her own. We're not going to give up, though. We're going to ride this through to the very end, because if we're not going to win it here, we're going to win it in the courts.
Yes.
And we're going to continue to fight. And she isn't going to be the first. Others are going to quit. I've talked to other cities who are saying they're going to throw up their hands. But the work that we're doing is important to lay the groundwork for where we go next, and to prove that we were committed to this cause throughout, and that if we go to court, we're going to go to court with clean hands. I want to go through this process and ensure that we have done everything humanly possible before I stand with you and probably 10,000 other people and get arrested to stop this line.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that's a hard thing to promise for a lawyer and a mayor. And it'll probably be the end of my career. But if I have to end my career on that note, it will be something that I'm very proud of, that I have stood my ground with my citizens. Now, one last thing, and I wanted to tell you this because I wanted to let you know that sometimes citizens can be successful. And you probably heard in the news that Kinder Morgan's application for eminent domain, the ability to take over private property in Georgia, was refused by the Georgia Transport Organization. You know, we look down our nose at the southern United States. Now, come on, admit it. You know, you have. You know, those rednecks down there. You know, and those rednecks have got more democracy than we do here in Canada. They actually had an organization that was prepared to say no to Kinder Morgan in the Deep South. Why can we not, in the true north, strong and free, do exactly the same thing? When will Canadians recognize that as long as this government is in power, as long as this government is able to impose its will, as long as this government is able to work with organizations like Kinder Morgan, who lobby and pay for their elections, as long as we have a government that's willing to put corporate interests ahead of the interests of their citizens, is that we're going to continue to have decisions like this made. And that's why I'm going to be working so hard over the next few months to change this government and to ensure that we elect people who represent our citizens. So, I want to thank all of you for the incredibly warm welcome you gave to me and to my staff tonight. I'm so proud to be the mayor of this city and to represent you. It's a struggle that we continue to fight together, and we continue to put our resources into this. We continue to hold our heads up high. We continue to do everything we can to make you proud of us, to know your city cares and will do its best to ensure that your interests are protected. And we hope, and I think you've proven it in the last elections, we hope that you continue to have faith in us, to have trust in us, and most importantly, that you stand with us. Thank you.
So when I first started preparing for this talk, I came across so much material. There's information on occupational risks of dilbit. There's all sorts of experiments that could be referred to. But I quickly realized that there was one information source that brought it all together in a very, very nice summary. And this information source is called a material safety data sheet. Now, my graduate students think that a material safety data sheet is the most boring thing in the world. They're asked to read them in the lab so that they familiarize themselves with the chemicals that they're using in experiments. And what I've done here is I've relied on information from 2 material safety data sheets. These are the oil industry's own safety sheets, which describe the nature of this material. That's a little bit better. And the other information source that I've used is a federal government report on the nature of dilbit. So here I've zoomed in on the material safety data sheet, and this is one for Access Western Blend. This is one of the types of dilbit that Kinder Morgan flows through its pipelines all the time. And you can see I've highlighted in yellow. The first thing you see is danger. Can enter lungs and cause damage. Cancer hazard. Can cause cancer and irritating. And you see here the symbols that mean flammable and toxic. So if you go a little bit further in the material safety data sheet, it says what happens if you inhale the fumes from dilbit. It says you may experience loss of consciousness, and it points out that dilbit contains hydrogen sulfide, which is an extremely hazardous chemical, which may cause respiratory paralysis or even death. And then it goes on to study the carcinogenicity, or the cancer-causing nature of dilbit. In part because it contains benzene, dilbit is cancer-causing. It causes anemia in particular. And if that wasn't enough, it goes on to state that it's thought to be mutagenic, which means that it's thought to be able to change DNA sequences, which means that it can potentially cause birth defects. It may have effects on fertility, and it's thought to be embryotoxic as well, so potentially to endanger developing fetus. Now, this all depends on dose, but this is the nature of the material. And if you go a little bit further and you look at each of the individual components which are listed in the material safety data sheet, and if you do just a little bit of digging, you will find all sorts of public health databases which talk about the hazards related to individual ingredients within the dilbit. And I'm just going to give you a couple of high points or low points, depending on your point of view. Benzene can cause anemia in addition to cancer. Hexane can cause nerve damage. And hydrogen sulfide is so toxic it was actually used as a chemical weapon in World War I. But a lot of the lack of safety of dilbit relates to how flammable it is. So it's a flammable liquid, and it produces vapors that are also flammable. And those vapors can travel travel great distances. And as Chris Bocock told you, if they encounter ignition source, they can cause a fire. So they're also sensitive to static discharge at temperatures above the flash point. Now, just for a little chemistry lesson here, the flash point is the temperature above which a material can ignite if it encounters an ignition source. And you see here that the flash point of dilbit vapors are lower than -5 degrees Celsius. So any temperature that's above that means that this material can ignite. So in Burnaby, how much of the year is it above -5 degrees Celsius? Pretty much all the time. So if this was Winnipeg in the middle of winter, it might not be the case, but here in Burnaby, dilbit can be ignited any time of the year. And to top it off, the dilbit vapors are also heavier than air, and so if they're released, they will hug the ground, and that will tend to maximize the exposure of people nearby. Now, this slide may actually not look exciting, but I'm a scientist, and so I have to show you a graph in any presentation that I do. And what this is this is the result of what they call a pan evaporation test. They put the dill bit in a pan, and every now and again they weigh it at certain time points, and they make a plot of the percentage weight lost over time. And what you see here on this is you see time, and you notice that as soon as the dill bit is put in the pan, it evaporates very quickly. A lot of it is lost right away, and 20% of it is actually lost in about 65 hours. And then an additional 6% or so is lost over the next 30 days. So think about these time frames. So now think about where we're sitting right now. So we're very close to the location of the proposed expansion. So if you imagine there was an earthquake or some other event that resulted in a tank being breached and the dill bit was to flow relatively close to us, how would we find out about this? It would probably be by means of having a huge hydrocarbon smell come wafting toward us. So we would know something was very wrong. But what would we do? Would we try to escape? Would we go outside and try to get away? But the fumes are toxic. Would we go out and start our cars? I don't think so. That's an ignition source and it's flammable. Would we stay in the school and close the doors and windows and hope that it didn't seep in? And now you see that the time frames involved are not just an hour or so. This is 65 hours, where a huge weight of dill bit is actually still evaporating. This has huge implications for how we would be evacuated. And in addition, in part because of the bitumen part of dill bit, when there's an oil tank fire, the smoke is particularly toxic. And of course it would exacerbate respiratory problems and also heart problems. It also contains sulfur dioxide, which is a problem for that as well. But one of the biggest features is that it is has huge levels of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And these are among the compounds that are the best understood, most highly studied cancer-causing compounds that I know of. We understand so well how they work. They actually bind to our DNA and mess it up. As you've heard, the tank fire might burn for days. A lot of smoke would go in the air, and that smoke is non-trivial. It's going to contribute to the exposures of the population, and it will probably contribute to the cancer burden in our population years down the road after a long latent period. So it's very serious in the short term, in addition to in the long term. So I'm just going to finish off by pointing out that back in the early 1950s, and this is a picture from the Burnaby archives. Here's the tank farm. It was in a fairly wide open area then, and it probably didn't seem like such a bad idea at the time. But now, of course, this is a very, very different city with neighborhoods and schools. Nobody can guarantee that there will not be an earthquake or some other event that will cause a breach of the tank or a fire. This could very well happen, and no one can say it will never happen. So I believe that allowing Kinder Morgan to expand storage of this dangerous material in this particular location at this point in time is not only unethical, but reckless.
And now for the bad news. I've lived in Burnaby for 69 years. I've lived right next to the tank farm for the last 45, along with my wife Carol and our grandchildren and our children. I'm not a member of any political party, and I don't belong to any organized protest groups. I do a lot of studying, and I advise various groups when they come and seek advice from me. The Kinder Morgan tank farm was planned in the late 1940s and built in 1952. It was completed, and it was designed to bring crude oil from the oil fields in Alberta to the terminals in Burnaby. Not so much to the terminals, but to the refineries that we had along our south shore of Indian Arm. Now, the tank farm has always been a known fire danger. I live on Aubrey Street, and I can tell you there's good and bad things about that. It was always the fire access road to the tank farm, which means that when it snowed in the wintertime, we were the first people to get our road cleared. Burnaby has since seen fit, Merrick, Oregon, to turn the top end of the road into a park. So I don't know how you, Chris, will get in there when we have a fire. You have to obey the park signs. Kinder Morgan, the tank farm Trans Mountain has been owned by Kinder Morgan only since the year 2005. And in the early days, spills and incidents along the pipeline route and at terminals were never reported. Now, if you believe what you see on TV and you watch the expensive ads from Kinder Morgan, you will learn that the tank farm has been operated safely for over 60 years. Not true. The tank farm has been operated very lucky for 63 years. And there have been numerous incidents. The major incidents that I can report to you, I got through Freedom of Information. About the same time Freedom of Information request was put in, they mysteriously appeared on the National Energy Board on their website. Now, you will see here, I have listed the 9 largest spills that they have had along the pipeline route. And you'll notice starting in 1966, the first 3 were line leaks in the actual pipeline. But you'll also notice that the last 6 here, one was a pump station. The other one was at a tank farm in Edmonton. But it is also curious to note that the last 3 I have listed there are all in the Lower Mainland. There was the one at Sumas Tank Farm. There was one at the West Ridge. I call it the Kinder Morgan oil fountain. That was Inlet Drive. And then that led to Lake Kinder, which was the oil lake that was left after the spill. And there's several people here that were directly affected by that. Their houses were doused in oil. This is crude oil. So there's a trend here. The last ones have been in the Lower Mainland. Getting closer to home, aren't they? Some of them are right pretty much within a stone's throw where you're sitting right now. The last spill was disturbing because there's an agreement between the Burnaby Fire Department and Trans Mountain or Kinder Morgan, interchangeable. There's an agreement that they will report spills to the Burnaby Fire Department. It took 2 or 3 days before they reported that spill, and it only got reported because some of the employees started letting the Burnaby Fire Department know that there was a problem up there, and some of the residents, I gather, were complaining about the fumes and so on. Now I can tell you from personal experience that the 81 incidents along the pipeline are just the tip of the iceberg. I have lived right next to the tank farm. Some of you here have probably lived near here for a long time. Some of you may recall that in the 1970s and 1980s and into the 1990s, my wife and I would have the window open to the bedroom at night, And about 2 o'clock, mysteriously, 2 o'clock in the morning, there would be this putrid odor come through our bedroom window. We're within 400 yards of the tank farm. And this putrid odor would come through and wake us up. And I would have to get up and close the window because of the stench that was coming from the tank farm. How many of you here have ever had that smell or experienced that? Yeah, one or two. So you know what I'm talking about. It's not an imagination. All right, those are gases that were released, and there was legal action threatened against Trans Mountain, and they did put caps on the tank. I don't know exactly what year. Last year, or in the last 2 years, there's been over 1,500 leaks throughout North America along the tank farm facility. So how much hydrocarbon is going to be stored up on that mountain if they're allowed to go through with this? Keep in mind how dangerous the new stuff is. Right now they have a capacity of 1.7 million barrels. They're looking to put 5.6 million barrels up there, just above us here. And most of you have probably heard of the Exxon Valdez. Now, the Exxon Valdez was an oil spill. It was a tanker in Alaska. It ran onto some rocks and it spilled a lot of oil. It spilled, as a matter of fact, 257,000 barrels of oil. Filled up the channel. They have not finished their cleanup operation, and so far they have managed to recover 20% of the oil that was spilled by the Exxon Valdez. Now that seems like a lot of oil. Some of you are reading ahead and chuckling already, because if you divide that 257,000 barrels into the 5,600,000 barrel capacity that Kinder Morgan is seeking, you will find that we will have 22 Exxon Valdezes parked on a mountain above your school, your community, and above everything that you own if you happen to live in this area. So I think that puts it in perspective just a little bit. Some of you remember a more recent disaster at Lac Mégantic in Quebec, where 63 cars of a 72-car tank train ran off the rails, caught on fire, and exploded. Each of those tank cars carried 650 barrels of oil. If you go through and do the math, you will find that what is going to be stored not far from where you're sitting is 137 times the amount of crude oil that exploded in Lac Mégantic and laid waste the city, a 1-mile diameter area of total destruction. That's the picture of it. So how do you feel? How does that make you feel if you happen to live around here? It's above your family, it's above your home, it's above all your possessions, and it is above 3 elementary schools. You have heard from Chris Bocock how difficult it would be to mount an evacuation of students from schools, and how immediate that response would have to be. This one, actually, I think this one, I don't know who had part of this slide before, but this shows the water courses down Burnaby Mountain. And you will see up here, this is the tank farm. Water courses start up at Simon Fraser University, come down the hill, go into Silver Creek and Eagle Creek, down through the golf course. That's the golf course there. And they continue on down the hill, go past the Lougheed Highway along here, and continue down into Burnaby Lake and off down the river into the Fraser River. Now, what is this kind, concerned neighbor that you keep hearing from prepared to do to look after you in an emergency? Do you think they would take any responsibility for you? Well, I'll give you some idea here. I had a meeting at the Kinder Morgan facility with the Western Regional Superintendent of Kinder Morgan and the retired person from the same position. I wanted to have a look at the technical drawings of the secondary containment areas around the tanks. I was particularly concerned about how they had been built and to what standard they had been built. It was a good meeting. They brought in digital drawings from Calgary. We sat there, they let me look at the drawings and so on. One thing that disturbed me was the fact that the whole process, the whole thing had been designed by SNC Lavalin. That doesn't throw terror to your heart. The only Canadian engineering firm that has been banned from loaning money from the World Bank because of corruption. I asked some questions and they didn't have the answers, but they said they'd get back to me, and they did. Oh, by the way, about 3 years ago, I started looking at maps, and I realized that that tank farm was just below Simon Fraser University. And I thought, my God, the only way up there is from Gallardy Way or from Hastings Extension on the west. There is only one way up to Simon Fraser University. It's right within a couple of 100 feet of where they're going to place the new tanks. So if you went up there and there was a fire at the tank farm, how would you ever evacuate that mountain? There's probably 10 to 15,000 people up there during the day. How would you ever get them off that mountain? Are they going to run down the bike trails? You can't get them off there. I've spoken to Chris Bocock about this, and they would not be able to get up there because of the fire and the fact that they couldn't take assets up through this intersection to rescue people. Kinder Morgan also put out a brochure that came to my door. I got it because I own a business. Probably most of you never got it. They didn't send it out to the residents. It lays out, and I would beg you to come over and read what the danger points are, how you recognize a spill, and what they tell you to do in the case of a spill. There it is over on the wall. Please read it. I spent $100 of my own money having it plasticized so that you could read it. In a town hall meeting, I asked the question, what is Kinder Morgan prepared to do to evacuate people from Simon Fraser University? What is your plan? The person that was speaking to me said, well, we are only responsible for rescue within our own facility. I said, I don't think you understood my question. I am asking, you have a dangerous facility here, you're below the university, what are you prepared to do to help rescue these people? The second response was, well, we do not have an obligation to engage or any responsibility to engage in a response, an evacuation plan. I asked the third time and the person was getting a little testy. I did voice it a different way. And he said, well, We do not have the right to interfere with Simon Fraser's evacuation plan. Do any of you know Andrew Petter? Would you tell him to pull his head out of the sand and listen to what's going on so that he can take a position about his university and the safety of the people that are living up there? So there are a variety of things that can happen. And this is basically what I wrote, and it is interesting that Robin Allen came out today as Mark Ellison had before, and I had written this down a few days ago. And for those of you who can't see it, the National Energy Board has captured fly and is being used as a tool of large oil companies and our federal government. The review process is a sham and a farce. This process has laid waste to the notion that concerned citizens have the ability to ask meaningful questions and cross-examine answers given by the applicant. The review process must be brought home to BC and executed by a qualified, well-balanced, independent body. And I have been twice allowed to be a commenter, and I can tell you, I'm announcing right now, I quit. I am not going to participate in this farcical charade that is being carried on in the name of some form of democracy, because democracy has gone out the left window. So these are the kinds of things that you can do. You can read that, and thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for Broke for having me here, and we're lucky to have a group like that working with us.
Thank you.
Is there currently any coordination that takes place between the City of Burnaby and the Province of British Columbia regarding emergency response for either the tank farm or for the Westridge terminal?
Okay, feedback or Chris, you want to respond, please? Okay.
Thanks for the question. Currently what occurs is with an emergency response, any type of emergency response in the City of Burnaby, the City of Burnaby, through its fire department, responds through the RCMP, and it activates what's called an Emergency Operations Center. And then it seeks support from the provincial government in the British Columbia Emergency Preparedness Program, so PEP as it's called. So that's how that system is set up to work throughout the province.
Few people who managed to escape jail time at Enron when a bunch of the employees' pensions got swindled out from underneath of them. I want to know if that's true. I don't want anybody to know that it is.